Dan, your favorite Polish Taiwan YouTuber. Hope you're all having a great day. Welcome to today's show. Today, let's talk about why decoupling from China might actually benefit you in the long term. I've been observing the CCP resonators in Taiwan and the pro-China politicians for a long time. They often spread panic and scaremonger on the consequences of decoupling from the Chinese economy. It seems as if Taiwan's economy will be destroyed if it were to decouple from China. In this regard, we can look at Australia's current situation as a case study for Taiwanese people. China's wolf warrior style of diplomacy has started having a negative impact on its economy, energy, and military development. Well, just take a look. While the whole world is paying attention to Russian invasion in Ukraine and the situation in the Taiwan Strait, China decided to start making concessions to its long-time adversary, Australia, hoping to restore the era of peaceful coexistence and prosperity. Recently, in addition to inviting officials from Germany and France to visit Beijing, China has also been actively inviting representatives of Australian companies and local government officials to visit China. This is the first time in over 3 years that an Australian delegation has visited China amid the deterioration of relationships between the two countries. Would Australia forget about China's aggressive behavior? Here, let me briefly summarize the multi-layered conflict between Australia and China and how the relationships between the two have been deteriorating in recent years. It all started back in 2018. The most famous episode at that time was Australia's ban on Huawei's participation in building the country's 5G communication network on the grounds of national security. Then in 2020, because China had concealed the outbreak of the pandemic, the Australian government took the lead in calling for an independent investigation into the origin of the virus, urging the international community to take action. In the same year, Australia also resumed its participation in Malabar naval exercises. So now Australia, the United States, Japan, and India are jointly deploying naval forces to deter China in the South China Sea. At the same time, the border conflict between China and India broke out in May 2020, followed by Australia signing a bilateral defense agreement with India, allowing both countries to use each other's military bases. China also announced in May that it was banning 4 major Australian beef exporters from the Chinese market. At the time, Australia's beef exports to China accounted for 35% of its total beef exports. Then in October, China suddenly started accusing Australia for selling them barley with pests. It seems that China's excuse for banning agricultural products is always pests. That time they imposed an 80.5% anti-dumping and anti-subsidy tariff on Australia's barley exports. And as a result, Mexico happily bought up all of Australia's barley. Have you heard of China's recent 退林换耕, turning the forest back into farmland campaign? Basically what they're doing is cutting down forests on hillsides or windbreaks and turning them into farmland. Xi Jinping and China are extremely anxious about food supply, so they're also considering lifting restrictions on Australian barley now. In the same year, in November, China accused Australia of dumping its wine into China and imposed an anti-dumping duty of 212% on Australian red wine. And China at the time was the largest destination for Australian wine exports. As a result, Australian red wine and lobster were bought up by the world's largest group of people, those who can't stand the CCP. China also accused Australia of racial discrimination and warned Chinese students and tourists not to go to Australia. At the same time, it also threatened Australian journalists in China and detained Chinese Australian former CGTV CCTN anchor Chen Lei, accusing her of engaging in criminal activities that endanger China's national security. As of 2023, there is still no news of her release. In addition, the CCP has also attempted to detain 2 Australian journalists in China as political hostages and engaged in various intimidation activities. And now let's talk about what happened after the CCP banned Australian coal. I believe everyone still remembers that in autumn of 2021, China started a series of planned rolling blackouts across the country. This was because of the ban on Australian coal. The CCP probably forgot that their power grid was primarily based on coal, and perhaps COVID pandemic had damaged their brains. Xi Jinping thought that China had already achieved green energy state and is not reliant on fossils anymore. At that time, the CCP's internet army was still mocking Taiwanese people for the phrase that Tsai Ing-wen said once, "Generate power with love." However, the fact proved that the CCP didn't even have any love to start with. and they simply cut the power off. At the time, they didn't admit that banning Australian coal had caused harm to their people, and instead made up various excuses such as energy conservation, carbon reduction, energy consumption control, and COVID lockdowns. At the time, in addition to the city of Yiwu in Zhejiang province, that is called the factory of the world, which could not catch up with the delivery schedule before Christmas due to the power outage, the power cut spread to 20 provinces, including Guangdong, Anhui, Jiangsu, Shandong, and the 3 provinces in northeast China. The governor of Jilin province even revealed that he wanted to increase the import of coal from other places. What is even more ridiculous is that even though the CCP banned Australian coal, Chinese businessmen still bought Australian coal at a higher price from third countries. Well, that's a lot. So you think that sums it up already? Funny things keep happening, actually. In mid-July last year, due to a Russian invasion in Ukraine, the whole world imposed economic sanctions on Russia, of course, including its energy exports. The plan of using Russian natural gas and coal to supplement the energy shortage was also thwarted, and the global demand for coal increased, causing the price of coal to go through the roof. On the one hand, the CCP was worried that purchasing Russian coal would lead to sanctions, so they had to seriously consider lifting the ban on Australian coal. Even some media outlets have obtained internal CCP messages indicating that before the 20th Party Congress in the autumn of 2022, they need to avoid large-scale power outage incidents like in 2021, so as not to embarrass Xi Jinping's high-profile moment of re-election because of the power outage. It is equivalent to indirectly admitting that last year's power outages were caused by coal shortage. It is sad that one lie needs a bigger lie to cover it up, and it truly is a brilliant illustration of that saying by the CCP and the rule of Xi Jinping. After being subject to inexplainable trade sanctions by the CCP for the past few years, Australia has actually opened up new markets and found new trade partners for itself, such as India, which is experiencing rapid growth right now. Furthermore, Australia has found that even though the CCP has used all kinds of tactics to impose trade sanctions, it remains Australia's largest export market. This also proves that it's not Australia that needs China, but rather China that needs Australian products. Once China loses access to Australian raw materials, its fragile economy will collapse even faster, putting pressure on its regime. The recent example of preventing large-scale power outages before the 20th Party Congress proves that point. At the same time, Australia has strengthened its financial system and enabled its government to provide sufficient funding for the expanded defense budget to combat China's military threats and expansion in the neighboring region. Its military budget situation is actually one of the best among developed nations. Meanwhile, Australia's newly elected Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has not given up the tough stance against China. He is currently committed to strengthening the Quad security partnership with the United States, Japan and India, as well as he understands the importance of AUKUS and the nuclear submarine agreement. The Australian government has also announced this year that it will reject investments in the rare earth industry related to China. Up until now, do you feel that Taiwan's semiconductor business and many other industries are also in a similar situation? Actually, I really doubt that Taiwan needs to rely on China. It seems like that's the Chinese Communist Party that relies on the whole world to maintain its rule in China. In the previous episode, we mentioned that the Chinese Communist Party's aggressive behavior towards Taiwan has shifted from buying Taiwan to deceiving Taiwan. The means of deceiving Taiwan have become increasingly extreme, and the economic card is always the most effective way to influence politics or international relations. In order to deceive Taiwan, the Chinese Communist Party often uses various excuses to arbitrarily sanction goods exported from Taiwan to China, interfering with political processes in Taiwan by influencing trade. This not only allows the CCP supporters in Taiwan to have more space to influence public opinion, but it also intends to create a negative impression of the current Taiwanese government amongst the voters. At the same time, the CCP is also using those mouthpieces and pro-China politicians to create panic in Taiwan. They want Taiwanese to have an impression that trade and economy is being obstructed by China. In addition, with the 3-year pandemic and the Russian invasion in Ukraine, global inflation has also put pressure on Taiwan. Costs of living are rising, forcing Taiwanese people to feel tired of the overall global situation. The CCP wants Taiwan to eventually make concessions on its sovereignty in exchange for money that no one will get in the end, by the way. Some folks who are naive in politics may think that as long as they elect a party that doesn't provoke the CCP, or that the CCP likes as the ruling party, they can return to the relatively stable period when Taiwan was being bribed or bought by the CCP, and it would be business as usual. Most Taiwanese people actually don't like the CCP, let alone the the Xi Jinping regime. But they also think that pro-China party in power would be relatively moderate and a party that the CCP would accept. They don't believe, actually, that the so-called peaceful reunification agreement will really be signed. And the pro-China politicians are just deceiving the CCP. They also don't believe that the pro-China politicians will dare to really sell out Taiwan. But in fact, this won't make Taiwan's economy stronger or make Taiwan safer. The results of the past 30 years of opening up to the CCP already showed us how Taiwanese businessmen's money is stolen, and technology is being transferred to the CCP, only resulting in China building missiles and warships aimed at Taiwan. Therefore, what we should think about is how to disengage from the CCP and how to establish more diverse and trustworthy economic and trade relations and military cooperation with allies, which is the best way to maintain peace in Taiwan. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please press like, subscribe, and share. This is Stan. I see you in the next one. Bye bye.